I was curious, so I thought maybe you would be too. Hi, I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings, and I was curious as to what the top proven winner annuals were of all times. So I figured they probably had to have a list of their best sellers, their plants that get the most awards, and just the ones that people really enjoy in their garden. So today we're going to take a look at a few of the top plants, annual plants that Proven Winners has brought to the market over the last several years. And I think the first one that starts the list off is no surprise to anybody. It's the Super Tunia Vista bubblegum. So as we're looking at this list, we're going to see plants that are for full sun. We'll see some that are for shade as well. And I think a lot of them on the list also are going to be plants that are fabulous plants for adding or attracting pollinators to the garden. So I got a little off tangent there. But the first one, as I was saying, I think is no surprise to anybody. It is the Super Tunia Vista bubblegum. And I would agree 100% on Super Tunia Vista bubblegum being our top seller here at Garden Crossings, and it has been for years. Why does everybody like Super Tunia Vista bubblegum? Well, number one, once you've tried it, the plant absolutely speaks for itself. It is excellent in full sun gardens. It is very prolific, lots of flowers. It is very vigorous. One plant covers a lot of ground. So I will tell customers often if they're here looking for seed petunias, which we don't even carry, I'll say, you know what, please do me a favor. Try this one Super Tunia Vista bubblegum in your garden and let me know if you're not happy with it. They never come back. They never say, oh, I am not happy with that plant. And I shouldn't say they never come back. They always come back and say, I need more. So they're never coming back saying, you know what, Heidi, that bubble gum just was not what I was thinking it was going to do. Super Tunia Vista bubblegum, one plant can cover up to 3 foot in your garden. It creates a nice upright mounding habit, about 18 to 20 inches tall or so. But one plant, if you feed it with your favorite water-soluble fertilizer, water it regularly, it can get up to 3 foot wide in the landscape. So it covers a lot of ground. It has a lot of impact. And if you are just looking for a garden that wows, adding just a few of these Super Tunia Vista bubblegums in is going to create that splash of color that gardeners are looking to add into their landscape. The next plant is the Truffula pink gomphrena. So why I like Truffula pink is because it's an excellent upright plant. I like to call it a thriller. We'll use it a lot in our landscape, but we've also used it in our container combinations as well. For us, it gets about 20 inches tall or so, and it just has this very nice, light, whimsy look in the garden. So there are these beautiful, bright pink balls that stand atop nice, long, kind of just whimsy stems, and it blooms all summer long. We don't have to deadhead it or pick off any dead blooms. It just continues to flower all summer long. And it's definitely a plant that the pollinators really enjoy. We have the butterfly house here at Garden Crossings where we raise the monarch butterflies, and whenever we release them out into the landscape, they are always landing on this Truffula pink gomphrena. So it's definitely something that if you're looking to have pollinators in your garden, Truffula pink is going to be a great addition for that. Now next on the list, it's a Suncredible yellow sunflower. So I was a little bit surprised to see a sunflower on the list because I don't know, I guess I just was surprised. I shouldn't be surprised because this is a plant we plant in mass here at Garden Crossings at the very top of our waterfall garden. So we have probably about a 25, maybe 30 foot border that we plant right at the top of the waterfall. And these Suncredible yellows, they do fantastic all summer long. The area they're planted in is a full sun to part shade garden, depending on the time of the day. It's also a place in our garden that gets a lot of wind. We have a lot of cornfields across the street from us, and the wind just whips through the gardens. So they're handling the sun, they're handling a lot of wind, which a lot of wind also can create the gardens to kind of dry out a little bit more, so a little bit more drought tolerance going on. But the Suncredible yellow sunflowers, although they're a little bit smaller flower head, I mean, they're not those big 12 to 18-inch flowers. They're going to be more about a 4 or so inch flower size. They bloom all summer long. No deadheading required. They just continue to put on flowers all summer long. It's a great plant for the pollinators as well. And of course, when we're planting up our gardens here at Garden Crossings, we definitely like to keep the pollinators in mind because, you know, our goal is to attract the butterflies into our gardens, but also the bees are equally as important. And these Suncredible yellows, they perform and don't stop all summer long. They get about 3 to 4 foot tall, so definitely something you'd want to use probably more towards like the back of the border in your gardens or landscapes or, you know, whatever you're planting them in. We have used them in containers as well, although you're going to want to make sure it's a pretty good sized container if you're putting them in a container because of their height. They do get tall. Also, if they're in a container, they're going to drink a lot. So keep that in mind too. You'll have to keep up with the watering if they're in a container. Next on the list is another one of the Vista Supertunias. Vista Supertunia, or maybe I should say Supertunia Vista Silverberry. So silverberry was introduced. It's one of the vistas that was early on introduced. It features beautiful white flowers with pink veining. So being part of that Vista series, it's got that excellent habit and excellent vigor. Although bubblegum is the most vigorous in the Vista series, Supertunia Vista Silverberry can keep up with bubblegum if you were to plant them in combination with one another. It too will get about 18, 20, 24 inches taller. So in the landscape, it too has the ability with a proper feeding and watering to get up to about 3 foot wide. So another workhorse in the garden, definitely covers a lot of ground. And with that pink veining, it's really pretty when you plant it with other pink flowers because the pink of the other flowers really draws out that pink eye or the pink veining on the Supertunia Vista Silverberry and is really complementary. Another Supertunia in the list, and I think we're going to find a lot of Supertunias or petunias in this top list because they're so fantastic. They're great plants. There's a lot of other plants too, so don't be like, oh, there's just a bunch of Supertunias, I don't really want them. There's a lot of other plants, so keep listening because there's some things that are going to really knock your socks off. One thing I should say about the Supertunias though is a lot of people will come into the garden center and they're like, Heidi, I don't like Supertunias. I don't like petunias. And I'm like, well, why don't you like petunias? You know, we all have our reasons. And the reason number one is I don't want to have to pick at my petunias all summer long to keep them looking good. And I'm like, well, that's great. You won't need to. So with Supertunias, I like to call them the no-pick petunias, or these aren't your grandma's petunias. Supertunias are a sterile variety of petunia, meaning they don't produce seed. So back in the day when you were, envisioning grandma picking at the petunias to keep them blooming all summer, it's because those are seed varieties of petunias. She was picking at them to keep those flowers going all summer. She was picking away the seeds. She didn't want the energy to go into the seeds. She wanted the energy to go back into more flowers. Well, with Supertunias being sterile, they're not putting any of their energy into producing seeds because that's not what they do. They don't produce seeds. So their job, number one, is to produce flowers and to produce flowers all summer long. So Supertunia Mini Vista Pink Star. It's a really unique kind of flower form of petunia. And as the name implies, it has a star shape on it. So if you look at the flower, you'll see that it's primarily, I guess I don't even know, I want to say primarily white. And then it's got the pink star, or maybe it's primarily pink with the white. I'm going to say it's probably primarily white, though, with the pink star going on. Being part of the Mini Vista series, it has the great landscape vigor that you would expect from a Vista, But being part of the mini Vista series, the flowers are slightly smaller than your typical petunia flower. And the plant, although it's really good in the landscape, it doesn't get quite as tall as the Vistas do. So it's going to stay a little bit more compact, like just not mounding, just a little bit of a mound, not a big mound. And the Vistas have excellent vigor, so they too will fill a lot of ground in the landscape, creating just that massive splash of color that you would want from your supertunias. The next plant on the list is a foliage plant, and this is part of the Color Blaze series of coleus. This is the Color Blaze Torchlight. Now, one thing with coleus, and this is me being honest here, back several years ago, and I would have to say probably going back 15, 18 years ago, my first impression of coleus, and this is when I didn't know a whole ton about flowers, coleus were to me boring. Like they didn't seem cool. Well, that was before Proven Winners had started to introduce more and more of the Color Blaze series and giving plants a fair shot. We were trying them more in the landscape, and I learned more about them. I learned what their potential was and what they could do. And I'm glad that I didn't just go along with my first impression, because I would have never planted a coleus ever. So I'm glad we tried it and learned more about coleus. So specifically, my first thoughts were okay, coleus are a shade plant, which coleus can be grown in shade. But the nice thing with the Color Blaze series is most of them can be grown in full sun to full shade. And surprisingly enough, and maybe not so surprising, the more sun they get, the more vibrant the coloration of the plant is. So if you want to have the intense colors in these coleus, give them some sun and they're going to really shine in the garden. And Color Blaze Torchlight is no exception. Color Blaze Torchlight is I'm going to call it a tricolor. It's got the beautiful deep burgundy, near black foliage. It's edged in lime green or a bright green with its heavily serrated edges. And there's just a little touch of pink in there, or almost red, honestly, that is just, it's so vibrant. And again, the more sun this plant is planted in, the more vibrancy you're going to see on the foliage of those plants. Coleus can get tall, so some varieties get taller than others. The Torchlight series, depending on where you're at, how long your season is, it can get over 3 foot tall. Now, for us here in West Michigan, typically our coleus will get maybe 24, sometimes 30 inches tall. So they are a nice thriller, or a plant that's going to be give you more upright height in the garden. And the other thing too, and this is my personal opinion with coleus, I don't love the flower of coleus. Some people like them, and that's great. But one thing with the Color Blaze coleus is they've been bred to essentially not flower, or flower so late in the season that by the time they start flowering, kind of the season is over. If you do have some that start to flower early, go ahead and just pinch those flowers off. If you're like me and don't care for the flowers, it's certainly not going to harm the plant. And to be honest, we will frequently, especially in the greenhouse, we'll go through and trim our coleus a couple times throughout the spring. And the reason we do that is to create a thicker, fuller, more branched plant. So that is a tip. If your coleus is just kind of going straight and you want to branch it and bulk it up a little bit, go ahead and just trim it, and that'll help create more branching, which creates a thicker, fuller plant. The next on the list is the Cuphea vermillionaire. If you are looking to attract hummingbirds to your garden, this is a must-have annual. Cuphea vermillionaire is a full sun-loving, drought-tolerant, heat-tolerant annual, and it is a hummingbird magnet. It creates a nice mounding habit, about 20, 24 inches tall and wide. And those tubular orange flowers are something that are going to be, man, if you're looking for hummingbirds, this is a must-have. We had a garden we planted right outside our offices this year, and I'm actually in my office right now. And when I have my windows open, there's a whole border of those Cuphea vermillionaire, very intentionally planted. So when I'm looking outside, I could be watching the hummingbirds throughout the summer, and they were enjoying that plant for sure. The next on the list is another super tunia. It is the mini Vista hot pink. And this is another one that is a favorite here at Garden Crossings. We use it out in our landscape. Specifically, we use it in our islands that are in our parking lot. So we have it planted with the bobo hydrangea, as well as this year we had it planted with meteor showers verbena. And that plant just put on a massive color all summer long. We did it because when we were looking at the islands, the look we were going for is we wanted it to be just a constant sea of color. So when you were looking at those spaces, I mean, there are, these long islands in the middle of the parking lot. We can put some pictures up. We wanted it to be like boom, boom, boom. We wanted it to be in your face color. And those mini Vista hot pinks did just that. Being part of that mini Vista series, they were a little bit more compact than the Vistas, as I said earlier. So it's not like they took away from what was going on. They just kind of created a nice mat going on in those little areas in the garden. Another one we use here a lot at Garden Crossings, and obviously, I'm looking here at this top list from Proven Winners, and so much of what's on this list are things that we use in our landscape. And I find that once you find a plant that works and you know it does well, you kind of stick with that. And we do try other things, don't get me wrong. But when we're doing our mass plantings, we know what works and we know what those top plants are to us, to Garden Crossings. So it's cool to see how what we think are top plants are also coming up on this list from Proven Winners as what they're saying are their top plants. So Rockin blue suede shoes salvia. Salvia is another plant. If you are looking to add or attract those hummingbirds, they love the salvia. And blue suede shoes is kind of a unique color, more of a periwinkle blue, and it's got the nice deep dark black stems. It is definitely a tall plant, so if you're looking for a thriller for container combinations, or if you're looking to just add some height kind of towards the back of your garden beds, Rockin blue suede shoes is going to give you some of that height to add into the garden. It's nice when you have tiers in the garden. It's more pleasing on the eyes, or if it's just constantly a flat garden, it's not bad, but it's nice to add a little dimension and a little bit of tiers. So Rockin blue suede shoe salvia in our gardens, I would say got up to about 36 or so inches tall. So definitely something we used in the back of some of our garden beds, or we also used it if we were looking from two sides. We'd plant it right down the center so that it kind of triangled up to that thriller in those beds. And definitely, again, those hummingbirds, pollinators loved that plant. And Cuphea vermillionaire and the salvias, specifically even the Rockin blue suede shoes, we have customers every year that are like, all right, I don't care what I get this year, but I need to have those two plants. So something that if you're looking for those hummingbirds, give those a try. So another coleus on the list, and this is again part of that Color Blaze series. It's Royal Apple Brandy. Apple Brandy features chartreuse foliage and then kind of a burgundy, but more like a rusty burgundy color, kind of a bicolor there with that lime and that rusty burgundy. Heavily serrated edges on the leaves. This one's more of a upright mounding type habit. The flowers are a little bit smaller, a little bit elongated than some of the others in the Color Blaze series. So it's nice to mix some of these coleus together, just creating kind of a patchwork of coleus, you might say, because you're adding in so many different colors and textures. And even in some cases, there's a little bit of height variation that goes on. So it's a nice patchwork of color using foliage instead of flower. And again, like the torchlight we talked about earlier, the Royal Apple Brandy also has best color with the more sun it gets. So I don't know if you're like me, if you have that thought of shade is where a coleus goes, kind of break that thought a little bit and try them out in the sun and just see how much more vibrant the color is than in your shade gardens. Another one that is certainly a plant that those of you in the south can appreciate. We like it here in the north as well, but I hear a lot of good feedback from our friends in the south, and that's the Bloom My Mind, evolvulus or dwarf morning glory. And it's more of a ground cover, a mounding ground cover, I would say. If you plant it in a hanging basket, it'll only get maybe 6 or so inches tall, just kind of like mound and lightly trail over. I've also seen this planted in landscapes as more of a ground cover, and it's heat tolerant, it loves the full sun, and it's got beautiful periwinkle blue blooms. So especially for those of you in the south where it does warm up quicker and you have a hotter, warmer season, this is an excellent plant just because of its drought tolerance. Now for us here in the north, they do grow well also, but it does take them a little bit more time to really kick in and say, okay, it's time to flower, because we really need to get to the heat of the summer here in Michigan for this plant to really explode with color. So good in both areas, but definitely you're going to get more flowers and lasting longer in the south from what I've experienced. Another salvia on the list is Unplugged So Blue. And this is one that we've used in our northern Michigan garden quite a bit when we're going for that red, white, and blue look. A little bit different flower form than the Rockin blue suede shoes. But again, another plant that the hummingbirds just absolutely love. This has more your, I'm going to say, typical lavender purple color going on. The Unplugged, probably 24 inches or so tall, so slightly shorter than the Rockin series, but definitely a great upright thriller for landscapes as well as in container combinations. Now this next plant, when it first came out, everybody was kind of like, why this? And it is actually a lobularia called White Knight. So upon first looking at the plant, it looks like it's an alyssum. Well, for many of you that have grown alyssum, you know they flower and then they stop. They don't do a whole lot all summer long. Well, lobularia is basically a sterile version of alyssum. It's not the exact same, but a sterile version of alyssum. So its job is to continue to flower all summer long. So if you like the look and the smell of alyssum smells so yummy. The lobularia White Knight will give you that look and that smell all season long. We've used this planted as a border in the landscape because it doesn't get very tall, maybe 6 or so inches tall, and it will spread about 18 or so inches wide. So it's a nice ground cover that has pretty good spread going on. But because it's sterile, its job is to put on flowers all summer long, like those super tunias we talked about earlier. And that's one thing Proven Winners does a really good job on, is coming up with plants that kind of defy some of the old thought processes of some of those older plants. And any of the lobularias, there's a few different color options. All of those are sterile varieties that just put on flowers all summer long and make an excellent ground cover, but also do a really nice job in hanging baskets. So I would call it a replacement for bacopa. If you're putting bacopa in a hanging basket, you know you let that thing dry out just one time, bacopa loses all of its flowers, and it usually takes about 3 weeks for them to kind of regenerate and come back. But with the alyssum, if it happens to dry out, it'll be flowering again like really soon. So you don't have that delay, that wait for your beautiful trailing flowers. Alyssum can handle drought much better. The next plant I love is the Luscious Royale Cosmo lantana. And I'm glad there's a lantana on the list, because I think lantana, number one, you're either going to love the smell or you're not going to like the smell. I like the smell of lantana. I think it smells really nice. But the other thing I like about lantana is so many varieties of lantana have so much color to offer. And that's true with the Royal Cosmo. It has shades of pink and of orange and of yellow. So kind of that, beginning of the rainbow transition of color. And these colors, as the flowers age and mature, the transition of color happens. So on one plant, you might have some flowers that are all pink, but then some of your older plant or your older flowers, as they're aging, you're going to see shades of orange and yellow as well. And I think that's really cool. Another thing with lantana is they are heat tolerant, drought tolerant. So if you are somebody who is not the best waterer, these plants are a little bit forgiving of maybe missing a watering or so. And two, they're also great for attracting the hummingbirds to the landscape. Lantana is a great plant for hanging baskets or in the landscape, in the ground plantings, and definitely another plant that you're going to be able to enjoy hummingbirds on throughout the season. Now we're going to look here at the next plant, which is a nice tall thriller for containers and also for in the landscape. And this is actually a cleome. It's Senorita Rosalita, and she's won a lot of awards, as has all of these plants actually that we've talked about thus far. Now, when we first had our waterfall garden, when we bought the place, we've been here for 21 years now. In the early days, we used the Senorita Rosalita at the top of the waterfall, and it did fantastic. It handled the heat, it handled the wind, it handled the drought. It gave us that nice upright look we were looking for at the top of the waterfall. Oh, God, I'm trying to remember. It was somewhere between 24 and probably 36 inches tall, and it bloomed all summer long. So here's another example of a plant or a flower that is sterile, and its job is to continue to produce flowers all summer long. It doesn't have to stop, put its energy into creating more flowers because it's not creating seed. It's just putting out more flowers all summer long. Now, one thing is funny because in the greenhouse, spider plant is another name for the cleome. In the greenhouse, when the team is out there working with it in the greenhouse, this is definitely not one they're going to say, oh, we love the smell of. So it's maybe not one to put right by your front door if you're loving the smell of your flowers coming into your house. It's not bad, but it's not a beautiful fragrance. Let's just leave it at that. Beautiful flowers, beautiful habit in the landscape, but maybe not the top one for fragrance if you're looking for a nice fragrant flower. Another petunia that is definitely kind of changing the color palette of the petunias we've talked about so far is the Supertunia Mini Vista Indigo. And the indigo is a deep, rich, dark purple. Again, being part of that Mini Vista series, it's excellent for in the landscape as well as in containers and hanging baskets. It does have a little bit smaller flower than petunias, but the sheer amount of flowers that this plant produces is unbelievable. Definitely another plant if you're looking to add just a mass of color into the landscape. The Supertunia Mini Vista Indigo is a great deep purple selection. Another favorite one is the Surefire Rose Begonia. And I'm surprised this one actually wasn't a little higher up on the list. We love using the Surefire Rose in the landscape here at Garden Crossings. And actually, we like to use all the Surefires. We've used Rose for a few years. The last couple of years, we've been doing more actually with the Cherry Cordial, which is a deep dark foliage with red flowers. But anything in that Surefire series is an excellent selection for a landscape plant. They'll get about 24 or so inches tall and creating a nice big mound of color, easy to care for. They like to be planted in full sun to part sun locations. And in addition to the great flowers, they have some really nice foliage as well. So it's kind of a flower foliage combination that just really makes those Surefire begonias stand out in the landscape. The next one is another Supertunia, and we talked about kind of the sister plant to this one earlier on in our list, but this is the Supertunia Mini Vista Violet Star. So we talked about the pink star earlier, and this violet star would be a great pairing to go with a pink star. So Violet Star is a white and purple super tunia. So the purple is actually the star pattern and it's very vibrant. The thing I like to do with some of these bicolor blooms is if you're looking to plant a container combination and want, let's say, several colors, but you only want to go with maybe 2 or 3 varieties. If you're using some of these bicolor blooms in there, you're adding an additional color to the mix. So imagine this, you want 2 plants. One, you want Super Tunia Vista bubblegum. And I'm just using that one because a lot of you know what Super Tunia bubblegum looks like, that bright pink. Pair it here with the mini Vista Violet Star, and you're going to have 2 plants, but 3 colors going on. So you're going to get the pink, the purple, and the white by just using 2 varieties. And I think too, by using solids and then flowers that have kind of a texture or a pattern going on, they also play well off of each other. If you've got your solids and then your patterns, the solids really accentuate those patterns and make those patterns pop even more. So Mini Vista Violet Star is also a super tunia that we do frequently use when we're putting our hanging basket plans together, our recipes together. Violet Star finds its home in several of the recipes of hanging baskets that we use here at Garden Crossings. Down to the last 2 varieties, and both of these are foliage varieties. And I think it's good to mix in flowers and foliage because, I don't know, you need the foliage to break up the flowers sometime. And this is a sweet potato vine, Sweet Caroline Medusa. And I have to say, I don't know, Medusa stands out the most to me. And if we're using it in our containers, usually we're choosing Medusa if we're choosing a sweet potato vine. I like the texture of the plant. It's very heavily serrated, lime green, but it does sometimes throw off little tints of kind of burgundies and purples. So sometimes you'll get just little hues on the foliage that just add another color to the mix. Sweet potato vines are good for, you can use them in the landscape if you want to create just a mass, like a ground cover. One thing I will say is sweet potato vines are very cold sensitive. So if you live in a colder climate, make sure that you're watching your temperatures because sweet potato vines don't handle the frost well if you were to get a late frost. But where I like to use them also is in container combinations or hanging baskets. I always say less is more when you're using your sweet potato vines because one plant does a big job in the garden in your recipes. So typically we'll plant one right in the middle and then we'll just kind of let it meander its way out. And usually by planting it in the middle, it'll find its way to all sides of the container or the basket. Pair it with your favorite super tunias, super bells, super bina. Those are all great plant pairings that you could do with sweet potato vine. But we've also planted it just sweet potato vine in a hanging basket. If somebody's looking for just more of a leafy green look, or you can use one of the black sweet potato vines or whatever. But sweet potato vines look not only good in combination, but they also look good just kind of out on their own in a container. And the last plant is an excellent thriller for planters. It can go out in the landscape as well. And this is a Graceful Grass's Prince Tut. We use the Prince Tut grass a lot in our planters, especially our big planters. One thing I will say is they are a cypress, and cypress are also water plants, so they can be planted near the water's edge, or if you have a pond or whatever, they're a great plant for that. But if you do plant them in a self-watering pot, such as an aqua pot, they will drink all the water you give them, and they will create a massive root system by the end of the summer. So just be prepared for a lot of roots, and if you do plant them in a water reservoir type planter, they're going to take all the water you can get. Now, Prince Tut will stand about 24 to 36 or so inches tall in full sun to part sun areas. I love the tufts at the top. So this this grass, it can get fairly dense over time. If you start with kind of just like a 4.5 inch pot to start with, by the end of the summer, that 4.5 inch clump can get upwards to 8 to 10 inches across. So it just keeps sending up more grass tufts all summer long. And what I like about it is those grass tufts that it sends up, they have these beautiful umbrella shape plumes. So it's just really fun, kind of a whimsy look for container gardens, as well as if you just kind of poke them in the landscape and are looking for some upright, kind of thriller, fun interest. They'll just add little poofs of color here and there. Hopefully you enjoyed this top list from proven winners of their top selling annuals. I'm sure some of these plants on this list have been in your garden. I'd love to know, what is your favorite plant that we talked about in this top list? Thanks for watching. I'm Heidi from Garden Crossings.